feet and a light unto my path. Unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path.
Welcome to SearchLight, a survey through Scripture with Pastor Jon Courson. It is our desire to bring you a systematic study of the entire Bible, chapter by chapter, book by book.
John says, I stood upon the sand of the sea, and he sees a beast rise out of the sea, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. As John is standing there on the seashore, he sees a beast rising out of the sea. Now, the beast is Antichrist. And as we have been teaching you, and I hope you're getting this down by now, the word Antichrist means literally in place of Christ. And that is why John would say, Pastor John would write in 1 John, hey, there are many Antichrists. Even today, right now, there are not the Antichrist who will appear, this character, but there are many things that can creep up, that can rise up, beastly things that can come to you and me to take our focus off of Jesus, and they become things that are in place of Christ. Well, this beast is the Antichrist who is coming. This one that's going to rise up in the last days. This second person of the terrible trio of the unholy Trinity. Even as you have Satan, the Antichrist, the false prophet, the devilish Trinity, seeking to counterfeit or be a counterpart of the Holy Trinity, which is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Spirit. Well, this beast rises up. Notice where he comes out of the sea. Now, Bible students, keep in mind that the sea in Bible typology, as you study the prophecies, the sea always refers to Gentile nations, whereas the land refers to Israel, the nation. And so there is no question, at least to me, in realizing that the Antichrist is going to be a Gentile. At least he will come out of the Gentile nations. Now, where the controversy is, it could be that Antichrist is a Jew who lives in the Gentile nations, who is a European, but a European Jew. And there is some reasoning behind that in the book of Daniel that suggests that that may be true. That Antichrist will be coming out of the Gentile nations, that is, from Europe, from the 10-nation confederation that's to be. But he very well may be a Jew ethnically. Of that, we cannot be dogmatic, but it very well could be. But the Antichrist here, he comes out of the sea, that is the Gentile world. Now, for you guys that are newer, the world is basically divided into 2 spheres, Jew and Gentile. So if you're not a Jew, you're a Gentile. Now, there's a third group that we know about that has emerged that is neither Jewish nor Gentile. What's the third group? The church, made up of ex-Jews and ex-Gentiles. Antichrist comes out of this, and he has 7 heads. Again, Revelation chapter 17, which gives us further information, tells us that the 7 heads are the 7 mountains, verse 9. You can just write it down. The 7 mountains upon which the woman who will appear in chapter 17, the harlot, she sits upon. And the 7 mountains are the 7 mountains of Rome. And so Antichrist coming from a European nation, a Gentile nation, because we know that he comes out of the sea and he has 10 horns, and he will be evidently based, at least initially, in the city of Rome. And it says he has 10 crowns, verse 1 goes on to say, upon his heads. 10 crowns, 7 heads, a beast. The picture here is hideous and monstrous. It's meant to be. A man who comes, again, out of Europe, possibly of Jewish ethnicity. 7 heads, which Revelation 17 says are the 7 mountains, the city of Rome, still known by that to this day and has been known by that throughout history. And when he comes, there is blasphemy upon his head. He is one who is rebelling. He is one who is blasphemous. He is one who is, as we shall see, the devil incarnate. Now, the idea here of Antichrist rising out of the 10 nations, which have been talked about, which have been vividly explained in Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7. The idea of Antichrist coming up from what used to be the old Roman Empire, now being revived in what I believe personally is the European community that we now see coming together. This Antichrist, this character, Daniel tells us that when he comes to power, he will grab the reins initially of 3 countries. Daniel calls him the little horn who comes up in the midst of the 10 other horns, the 10 horns being the 10 nations. And this little horn comes up and he subdues 3 horns. So when he appears, this will be one of the clues to knowing his identity. But if so, he will be a political leader from the Gentile world, from the old Roman Empire, maybe Jew in ethnicity. And as he comes to power, you can see him beginning to consolidate his power base by subduing 3 of the nations in this 10-nation confederation. He subdues them, he conquers them, he controls them, he dominates them. So that's why another reasoning why it says his 10 crowns are upon 7 heads, interestingly enough. The 7-head thing here has a double reference, not only as the 17th chapter says, it's the city of the 7 mountains, but also because it's not a 10-headed beast, because 3 of the 10 are subdued, are smitten, are consolidated, you see. So that leaves you 7. It's an interesting thing that you can begin to now piece together as you study the prophecies of Daniel. The Roman Empire officially, by historians, comes to an end in 476 A.D. Then begins to split in 2. It goes on, the Byzantine Empire and a remnant from Rome, but the unified, powerful Roman Empire ceases to be in 476 A.D. Now, many men have tried to come and put the empire back together. But you know, it becomes sort of a joke. So much so that little kids say, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. That nursery rhyme is about the Roman Empire. The fall of Rome. And everybody with their horses and men, all these kings, they try again and again to put Humpty Dumpty back together. But it's not going to happen until this character, Antichrist, comes. And he will be able to bring the old Roman Empire back into glory. That's the message of Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. We don't have time to go into that tonight, but for your notes or if you want to read, you'll see in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7 2 visions, one of a monument, the other of a monster. A monument in Daniel chapter 2. A head of gold, arms of silver, belly of brass, legs of iron, and then 10 toes mixed with iron and clay coming out of the legs of iron. Head of gold is the Babylonian Empire. The empire that was in power in the day when Daniel was written. Followed by the Medes and the Persians, the 2 arms, silver. Followed by the belly of brass, which we are told in the book of Daniel was the Greeks, led by Alexander. He was a great one. And they were conquered by the Iron Empire of Rome. Why 2 legs? Because east and west, the Roman Empire was split. And then from that comes the 10 toes, which is the rebirthing of the Roman Empire. Well, you say, what about France and the Napoleonic Empire? What about Germany and Hitler? What about all the other empire? Wait a minute. It was in the days of the Roman Empire when Israel ceased to be a nation. AD 70. Israel stopped being a nation. So when you study Bible prophecy, it all deals with God's timepiece, which is the nation Israel. And once Israel is dispersed and destroyed as a nation, then the whole clock stops. But then in 1948, what happened? Israel was rebirthed. So all those other empires, so-called, and all those other movements in history don't count when you're studying Bible prophecy until Israel becomes a nation again in 1948. In 1948, the same year that the seeds were planted for the European Union, the common market as it used to be called, the Club of Rome as it was then named, in Rome, Italy, 1948, the same year that Israel becomes a nation, they get together in Rome and they announce the formation in the Club of Rome of what they called the Big Ten. 10 nations from the old Roman Empire that would come together. Now you say, well, John, the European Union is bigger than 10 nations. It's presently 15, right? So what's going to happen? I don't know. Stay tuned. Watch and see. We'll begin to see some shifting. It may grow larger, and then it may go through some radical restructuring, and nations will pull out, and they'll begin to fight with each other. And that's why it's a mixture of clay and iron. It's not strong like iron, like the old Roman Empire. But you guys that are watching your newspapers, just watch. But you that watch TV news, you're going to begin to see this growing and shrinking and the brittleness of the European Union, but it will finally settle in, I believe. It will finally settle in to 10 toes, because that's what God declares in Daniel chapter 2, and that's what's talked about in Revelation 13. That's the way it's going to be. 10 toes, 10 horns, but then 3 are beaten back by Antichrist and consolidated. So at this point, you actually have a 7-horned being, or seven head being, because there's 7 nations that now have been kind of consolidated by this character, this political figure. Interesting. Daniel chapter 7, verse 8, for you that take notes, that's the verse that says that when the Antichrist comes, this little horn, as he's called, I considered the horns, and there came up among them, the 10, another little horn, before whom were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And there's your reference there about Antichrist, the little horn, conquering and consolidating 3. Well, the beast, verse 2, which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were as the feet of a bear. His mouth was as the mouth of a lion. Now again, for you Bible students, this is the same, again, vision that Daniel had, not in chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, a grand and glorious statue. That's man's opinion of government. That's man's perspective on history. Oh, these grand empires. But God, in Daniel chapter 7, gives His perspective, and it's not a glorious, grand statue. It's a monstrous series of beasts. The same beasts that are described right here Only notice the order. Because in Daniel chapter 7, for you that study these things, the order is inversed. It's reversed from this here. At first, in Daniel chapter 7, you have a lion, which is Babylon. Always has been, always will be, the symbol of Babylon. The bear, which is the symbol of the Medes and Persians. And then you have a leopard, which is the symbol of Greek. And then you had a fourth beast that was so terrible it couldn't be named. So why is this in the opposite order of Daniel chapter 7? Because Daniel was looking ahead, whereas John is looking, what? Back. These empires have already come into being, you see. By the time John writes chapter 13, it's already happened. So he's looking at it the other way. So you have this lion, which is Babylon, and you have this bear, which are the Medes and Persians, lumbering one foot upon the other, and you have the leopard, which is Greece, and you have the tiger, which is woods, and you have all these things, you see. Sorry. But these beasts appear, see. And the dragon gave him, the Antichrist, who is the personification of all the beastly empires of man that have previously come on the scene. Man thinks these empires are so great. God says they're beasts. They're lions and lepers. They're hideous and monstrous. You people, God would say, think government is so grand and so cool. You have your hope in the political process. You think the answer is in human government. It's beastly in God's perspective. What man thought was a grand image, Daniel chapter 2, God says it's a bunch of animals going crazy. And the more that we read in our papers about the things that go on in the political world, the more we can say, I think God is right. It's crazy. Well, he tells us now, as this dragon was giving the authority to this final beast, this Antichrist character, I saw one of his heads, verse 3, as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. So, Antichrist rises to power based in Europe, this 10-nation revival of the Roman Empire that I believe we now see in place, not in its final form, but it's getting set. At this point in the tribulation, Antichrist, who is now just kind of pulling his power together and coming into that place of prominence, is going to be killed, assassinated, shot, wounded. I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered, and they worshiped, verse 4, the dragon, that is Satan, who gave power unto the beast, that is Antichrist. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war against him? There will be an assassination attempt on Antichrist, and evidently he will die. Jot down what Zechariah has to say, chapter 11, verse 17. Woe to the idle shepherd that leaveth the flock. The idle shepherd is another name for Antichrist. The sword shall be upon his arm and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up. His right eye shall be utterly darkened. Zechariah 11:17. Antichrist, the idle shepherd. The assassination attempt will cause his eye, evidently, to be poked out, to be wiped out. And his right arm will be also a place in which the assassination attempt, the murderous event, affects. So, again, these are all pieces of the puzzle for those that are left behind. Antichrist, his right eye utterly darkened. His right arm wiped out, paralyzed. Now, in verse 8 of chapter 17, again, chapter 17 sheds light on the chapter 13 story. It says, the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. It is very possible that the Antichrist truly is killed. Now, there are those that believe that he will not really be dead, that he will appear to be dead, but that he will not really have died. My opinion is that he really will be dead and that he really will ascend to hell. And at that point, this character, Antichrist, this popular, powerful, likable, wonderful figure that's capturing the affection and the imagination of the world with all of his grand ideas and peace programs, he goes to hell, and he, according to Revelation chapter 17, goes into perdition. And when he comes back up again, he truly is the incarnation of Satan. Just like Jesus Christ comes from heaven, and he is God. He that hath seen me, Jesus said what? Hath seen the Father. It would seem as though Antichrist will truly be the incarnation of the dragon of Satan. We'll talk more about that and some other interesting implications of chapter 17 when we get there. But Antichrist is wounded to death, and the reason it's controversial is because the Greek can be rendered to the appearance of death, or it could be rendered actually to the point of death, and there is language arguments of scholars on all sides of this issue. But be that as it may, whether he is actually dead or just appears to be dead from this wound that affects his eye and affects his arm and the whole world is a witness of, something amazing is going to happen. His deadly wound was healed. He does what Christ really did when Christ came back from the dead, so too does Antichrist. He revives. Whether this is a hoax or whether it is actually the incarnation of Satan who comes into the body of Antichrist and now Satan controls the body, again, we cannot be dogmatic. But whatever is taking place here, man, the guy that was wiped out in this assassination deal suddenly pops back up to life, and the whole world wonders, I guess so.
If you would like to have this complete teaching, you may order one from our website at joncourson.com. You may also call us toll-free at 888-544-4858 and ask for the teaching from today's date. Again, that ordering number is 888-544-4858. You will also find on our website a variety of Pastor Jon's books, teaching packets, MP3 CDs, and other Bible study resources. Again, the address of the website is joncourson.com. SearchLight is a listener-supported ministry. We appreciate your prayers and support. May the Lord richly bless you.